Hello and welcome to this deep dive presentation about the REST API enhancement in the Child Welfare module of Kurum Social Program Management version 7.02. In this presentation, we'll start by discussing the as-is scenario, that is, the state of the software prior to version 7.02. We'll then move on to an overview of the solution or enhancement, including descriptions of the to-be scenario, in other words, the changes in version 7.02. We'll then present some of the technical details of the changes, and we'll finish by telling you where you can find more information about the updates. Customers in the United States are currently being incentivized by new CCWIS legislation to incrementally modernize their legacy child welfare systems. CCWIS stands for Comprehensive Child Welfare Information System and is the first comprehensive revision of SACWIS regulations that has occurred since 1993. One of the key requirements of CCWIS is modular design and interoperability. IBM Social Program Management provides a license for a child welfare intake-only module. For customers that are licensed for this module, it is likely that they may have a requirement to integrate SPM child welfare intake with an external system. This external system manages the later phases of the child welfare lifecycle, such as investigation and ongoing case management. Customers can currently integrate SPM child welfare intake with an external system via custom implementation. However, there is limited product support available to facilitate interoperability. There are no child welfare-specific APIs or hook points for integration between SPM child welfare intake and an external system. Customers must therefore build their own REST APIs. Kurum version 7.02 provides functionality that notifies an external system when an intake is approved and provides a preliminary set of data about the intake to the external system. The external system can then initiate custom processing based on the content provided to move the intake to the next stage of the case lifecycle. Only data that will not potentially include sensitive personal information is provided, such as basic intake details, including the intake category, type, intake ID, and recommendation information, including whether the intake has been screened in or screened out. The notification is created when an intake is either manually or automatically approved and has been provided for the intake types of child protection services, family services, and interjurisdictional. Version 7.02 also provides functionality that enables an external system to retrieve the details of an SPM child welfare intake after being notified of the creation of a new intake. The external system is able to provide an intake ID as an input parameter to retrieve further details for the child protection services, family services, and interjurisdictional intake types. Data provided to the external system includes intake-specific data and a subset of participant data for the various types of intake participants. The details provided to the external system include intake summary details, narrative, intake participants, allegations, recommendations, and several others. See the IBM Knowledge Center for the complete list. For intake participant-related details that are stored as snapshot data, details provided to the external system are retrieved from snapshot tables, not regular database tables. At the end of the SPM child welfare intake process, an intake worker captures a recommendation for whether the intake should be screened in or screened out. The intake worker then submits the recommendation for approval. If the system is configured to require supervisory approval, an intake supervisor is then responsible for approving or rejecting the recommendation. If the system is not configured to require supervisory approval, the intake is automatically approved. At the point of approval, the intake is ready to move to the next step in the child welfare case lifecycle. For example, if the recommendation of the intake is to screen in the intake, the next step is the creation of an investigation case for intake types of type Child Protection Services and Family Services, or the creation of an ongoing case for interjurisdictional intakes. SPM Child Welfare Intake notifies an external system of the approval of a new intake. providing an initial set of intake data, including the intake ID to the external system. The external system then initiates customer processing and requests additional intake details by providing the intake ID back to SPM Child Welfare Intake. In response to the request from the external system, SPM Child Welfare Intake provides additional details about the intake. Two integration points are provided as REST APIs out of the box. Service Provider Interface, to notify external systems of approval, and Web API, to allow external systems to read the details of the intake. The external system is responsible for interpreting and managing codes to ensure that they align with Kurum. You must configure the outbound target and service in the sysadmin application. You can customize the following for the outbound service: the data that is provided to the external system, and the web service technology that is used. This is a new feature, therefore there are no upgrade steps. The Knowledge Center describes the new integration points. This diagram shows a simplified view of the RESTful requests that take place between Kurum and the external system that processes the intake recommendation. First, the Notify External System process. When the intake recommendation is approved, the external system must be notified so that it can create an investigation case for screened-in intakes, or perform other processing for screened-out intakes. The Service Provider Interface gathers and sends basic intake details and recommendation data to the external system. The data does not include sensitive personal information about the intake. Configuration information about the external systems is retrieved and used to send the notification. The intake summary information is converted to JSON, and a notification is sent to the external system over HTTP. For the Request Intake Details process, external systems can use the Web API to retrieve the details of an approved child welfare intake. The external system sends the intake ID in the GET request. Kurum gathers intake and participant data, which it returns in the response. The data includes the following: intake details, narrative, intake participants, reporter, collaterals, providers, relationships, allegations, contact logs, users, and recommendation. Note that for the Notify and Request Details messages, Kurum reads participant data from read-only snapshot tables. Use the sysadmin application to configure the outbound service. Set the system property to enable the investigation service. Define the external target system using the Application Data Target System category. Specify the name and root URL. Define the CS approval service for the target system. Specify the service name, extension URL, invoking username and password. Set the system property to match the name of the target system. To use the system as provided out of the box, customers must ensure that a corresponding REST resource is available on the external system so that it can receive the POST notification from Kurum. They must also ensure that the resource and target system is configured in Kurum SPM as described in the previous slide. The Service Provider Interface, which provides the Notify service, can be customized to modify the implementation protocol and the list of data items that are sent to the external system. The Web API cannot be customized. For the outbound service, developers can provide a custom implementation of the outbound SPI interface to modify the protocol. For example, to use SOAP HTTP instead of REST. The custom class must override the makeOutboundCall method, which takes the following parameters. Link hash map provides a set of attribute name-value pairs for the approved intake. Target system util is used to provide information about the target system, and logger util supports writing to the system log. For the investigation service, to modify the list of data items, implement a custom investigation service which must override the notify action method. Note that the developer would need to have an advanced knowledge of the facades and service layer classes in order to aggregate the correct data set. In addition, due to the relationship between the out-of-the-box investigation and outbound service implementations, they will most likely need to replace the outbound service also. For both customizations, replace the out-of-the-box implementation with your custom implementation in a custom JUICE module. You can find more information about these updates in the IBM Knowledge Center for Kurum SPM, specifically in the section labeled Integrating External Systems with Kurum in the Connecting to a Kurum REST API guide. Also in the section labeled Integrating Child Welfare Intake with an External System in the Kurum Family Services Suite Configuration Guide. This is IBM's standard legal disclaimer. And this concludes the presentation about the REST API enhancement in the Child Welfare module of Kurum Social Program Management version 7.02. Thank you for watching.